大家好，歡迎大家收睇《將一長談》呢個節目，我哋節目主持人姚永安。嗱，今日大家睇就睇到咧，我哋係出外景，咁啊地點咧就係省長嘅辦公室。咁啊聰明嘅觀眾咧應該知道我哋今日嘅嘉賓咧就係 BC 省長David Yiu 嘅Premier。Welcome to your show again.
Yeah, thank you. Really good to be here.
嗱，咁你啊大概1年之前咧，就係成為咗 BC 省嘅省長啦。咁當時亦都令大家好意外咧，就係你提出咗一個100日嘅即係宏圖大計，就為100日要做到呢啲工作嘅。咁啊，而家超過300日啦。咁其實你當時提出嘅目標咧，有啲咩係做得到，有啲咩係仲未做得到嘅咧？
Yeah, it's crazy. It's been 300 days. It feels like yesterday my swearing in at Musqueam. But you know, in that swearing in ceremony at the beginning, I said I wanted to work on healthcare, housing, public safety issues, and cost of living, making sure there's economic opportunity for British Columbians. And it's nice because 300 days in, starting to see some of those initiatives that we started early on in my tenure starting to show up. So, for example, on housing, work that we've been doing around reforming municipal processes to allow more housing to be built faster. This past legislative session, some of those laws that took a fair amount of time to bring together so that they would be effective just passed in the legislature, and they're going to be put into place as soon as early next year, which will be very significant for many British Columbians. Addressing issues around Airbnb, opening up strata units for rental, lots of big changes on the housing front, and more to come, building a big program called BC Builds to use public land to build actually attainable middle-income housing for British Columbians. In healthcare, we broke ground on the new Surrey Hospital. I was at the St. Paul's facility, which is well under construction, including a brand new research building so that British Columbians benefit from cutting-edge cancer treatments. A new deal with the doctors to get more family doctors out there, a new deal with the nurses around internationally trained nurses, and public safety, convincing the federal government to change their bail rules to make sure that repeat violent offenders are not released, and increasing support for police so that there are police available to take the calls that people have, but also increase mental health supports, and cost of living credits for people. There's been a lot of work, Gabriel, but it's only been 300 days and there's so much more to do. I know people are expecting a lot more of me and of our government.
房屋問題咧就其實係全國性嘅，就唔單止係 BC 省。咁啊，當然我哋溫哥華就見到好多即係無家可歸嘅人士喺條街度啦。咁其實全國都有嘅。你頭先已經講過就係話你喺呢方面做嘅，但係我想知得更加多咧，就係話專門喺房屋方面，你係做咗啲乜嘢係可以幫到一般嘅市民啊，包括係業主啊，或者係租客啊，同埋仲有就係話你其實嗰個目標係乜嘢咧？
Yeah, Gabriel, it's a very challenging time in British Columbia for people looking for a place to live, either a place to rent or a place to buy. Interest rates have not made any of it easier. And I actually wrote to the Bank of Canada about interest rates saying, please, if you think housing is driving inflation, don't increase interest rates because that's increasing the cost of housing right here in British Columbia and it's making inflation worse. So what we're trying to do is open up as many housing units as we can that are available but underused. So in stratas, we had vacant units that people were not allowed to rent. We got rid of the restriction that prevented them from renting them. For Airbnb, we said you can only do Airbnb in your primary residence. You can't buy a bunch of condos and use them as a hotel and run a private Airbnb business because we need that housing for people to live in. That's getting the housing that we can open up right away. But in terms of the massive population growth that we've seen, 150,000 people came to our province last year, plus tens of thousands more international students. We need a huge amount of housing. And so everything from standardized housing designs, fast-tracking municipal approvals, using public land to build more affordable housing that's affordable actually for the middle class. All of these pieces are underway right now. And this has been a problem that was a long time building. You'll remember even in 2008 when I ran for city council, I was running on a housing platform then because it was obvious then where we were going. So there is more work to do, and we're going to keep doing it. And whether it's building the student housing or building middle-income housing or addressing homeless encampments, we've got a lot of challenges ahead. I was in St. John's, Newfoundland, and there was an encampment across the street from the legislature in St. John's, Newfoundland. That is the scope of the problem nationally, and we've got a lot of work to do.
其實我要問下你，因為好多人都會提出嚟就係話Airbnb 咁樣，咁有好多人就將自己嘅土庫啊，或者係買咗個 apartment 去租出去嘅，會唔會受你呢個法例嘅影響呢？
Yeah, so their Airbnb is great. So when my family goes on vacation, we like to stay on Airbnb if we can. It's great. The challenge we have is that we have a housing crisis and we need a place for people to live, especially people who work in the tourism sector, who run the coffee shops, who run the tourist attractions. They can't afford to live in the cities where there are a lot of Airbnbs, for example. So what we've said is we try to find a happy medium. We say, if you're going out of town and you want to rent out your house, you don't want to be here for the World Cup, you want to make a little bit of money like some people left during the Olympics, you can rent out your house. You can rent out, if you have a basement suite in your house, you can rent out the basement suite. If you have a laneway house, you can rent out the laneway house, but only one unit on your property. And you can't go and buy another condo and have a secondary house that you're running as an Airbnb somewhere else. It can only be in your primary residence. We're trying to find that balance of recognizing that Airbnb is helpful and useful and people like it, but the fact that we shouldn't have families competing with somebody who wants to open an Airbnb when they're trying to look for a place to live.
嗱，講緊話高通脹咧，咁就大家都知道係即係令到民生好困苦㗎啦，再加埋呢個高利息咧，就係好困難嘅。咁究竟作為省長，你有啲咩工作係可以幫到大家即係面對呢個問題咧？咁同埋亦都好多人就批評話呢個碳稅就係即係好貴。咁你有啲咩可以同大家講下呢方面嘅嘢咧？
Yeah, the costs facing people, especially due to global inflation and the rising interest rates, are really serious. You know, the inflation that we've seen is present in the United States, it's in the United Kingdom, it's in Europe, and we're seeing it around the world. Canada is not immune from it. My concern is that the interest rates raised by the central bank are really causing things to be more expensive, especially housing. That is driving inflation. So people's mortgage rates go up, their housing is more expensive. If contractors can't build new rental housing because their interest rates are too high to make the project go, and they're canceling rental housing projects, that makes rental housing more expensive. So interest rates are not an effective tool to bring down the costs of daily life in British Columbia. So what we've been doing is really working on getting more housing built. That's one of the biggest drivers of additional costs for people. When a business has to pay somebody to drive a long distance in from work, or they can't find employees, so they have to dramatically increase wages, they pass that on to consumers. That's because people can't find housing near their work. I know that people are feeling a lot of pressure around those costs, but some of the suggestions I've heard from the opposition about how to address this are really short-sighted. So for example, they say, oh, well, we should take the carbon tax off of gasoline prices. Well, that's what the government of Alberta did. And what happened? The gas companies immediately raised the price to make the price the same as it was before the tax cut. And so the government lost tax revenue to pay for other things, and the gas price was the same. So what we're looking for is ways to bring down costs for people, everything from reducing ICBC rates. BC hydro rates are lower than the previous government projected they would be, making sure that people have access to affordable daycare, affordable housing, any way we can find that supports them with the costs of daily life in a way that it's not going to increase the profits of the gas companies is what we're looking for.
另一樣嘢就係即係其實好多人都唔知道咧，呢個碳稅咧其實係有呢個 rebate 嘅。咁我知道就係 BC 省其實一直以嚟都有將收到嘅碳稅回饋翻俾市民，究竟係咪咧？
Yes, one of the things that the critics of the carbon tax often forget to mention is that the carbon tax is being rebated back to British Columbians in different ways, including through a direct income support called the Climate Action Tax Credit, and that British Columbians will in fact get more back from the carbon tax than they put in going forward. This is one of the ways that we think we can help bring down emissions, and we've reduced pollution in our province by 4% using these tools, which makes our air cleaner, makes it safer for people, but also does our global work around climate change. And we can support people with the cost of daily life, because when they switch from heating oil or inefficient gas heating to a heat pump, for example, they save a significant amount more money, and we reduce emissions. And so when we provide support for them to do those kinds of changes, they can actually save significant amounts of money.
So that means if you or the federal government cancel the carbon tax, those will be gone.
Well, the big challenge that the opposition that wants to get rid of the carbon tax doesn't talk about is it would result in significant tax increases for individuals or businesses or both in order to pay for getting rid of that tax.
嗱，咁啊，聯邦保守黨嘅黨領咧就 Poilievre 咧就經常都話，我哋嘅通脹咧就因為政府亂使錢，使好多錢造成嘅。咁但係呢個咧就似乎係連Bank of Canada 嘅行長咧都唔認同嘅。咁但係同一時間咧，我哋溫哥華居住咧睇得到咧地稅係揸得好犀利嘅。今年就增加10%，明年就增加7.5%。咁啊，如果你話做生意嘅咧，就呢個 business license 咧，就係由171蚊加到250蚊，係46%嘅一年加。咁啊，當然啦，大家知道打工咧就唔會話2年就加你17.5%人工咁多啦，就做生意亦都唔會話加你46%，即係呢個銷售會增加咁多啦。咁所以變咗政府嘅稅收其實係會影響市民同埋做生意人嘅困難嘅。咁雖然我知道溫哥華就唔係由你管啦，咁但係即係省政府究竟喺呢幾年嘅稅務上，究竟係即係幫緊市民啦，定令到我哋更加困難啦？尤其是我記得從前 BC 自由黨咧，經常都批評就係話新民主黨咧就好中意收稅嘅，好中意加你稅嘅。咁事實係咪咁咧，省長
Yeah, I think this is a time right now in British Columbia and in Canada where families are right at the edge. So every additional, and businesses too, every additional cost feels like it might put them over the edge in terms of just not being able to afford to live. And so, when they go to the grocery store and the food's more expensive, it really, so when any government fees or taxes or anything like that is very important for people right now to keep those low. It's how it's possible that even though our government has reduced taxes for people who earn $150,000 or less by it's about 20%, and people who earn less than $150,000 in our province pay the lowest personal taxes of anywhere in Canada. Even though that's true, people still feel a lot of strain in British Columbia. This is an expensive place to live. So just because we got rid of the MSP, just because we lowered small business tax by 25%, just because we've reduced middle income taxes in this way, we don't think our work is done. And in fact, we know that we have to find other ways to support people with affordability. But it is, I find it very, I find it ironic that the opposition says that they are the ones to provide affordability when they're the ones who put the tolls on the bridges. They're the ones who increased MSP every year. They're the ones who increased ICBC every year. They're the ones who projected much higher BC hydro rates. Despite their record, they insist that this time, if you try this time, they won't do the same thing. I don't believe them, and we should be judged against our record of where we've brought down prices for people.
嗱咁啊，講起話你嘅對手啦，咁啊 BC 自由黨從前咧亦都經常話新民主黨係一個即係對經濟好差嘅，即係經濟即係新民主一執政咧經濟就會好慘㗎啦。咁啊嗱，新民主黨就自2017年咧就執政到而家啦，即係執政咗幾年啦。咁啊，究竟呢一個經濟紀錄喺呢幾年裏邊 BC 省係做成點咧？咁同埋即係對於未來一年，有啲人就話擔心會有經濟衰退。你覺得 BC 省未來一年嘅經濟展望係點樣咧？
Yeah, I think there's some pretty major challenges facing BC's economy right now, but they're not the challenges that the opposition suggests. So they say government's got to get out of the way. Let the market move us forward. Everything will be fine. If with small government, we'll get rid of government, and then business will be able to prosper. Well, the big challenges we face right now in our economy, what's restricting our growth is we don't have enough housing, and we don't have enough people with the training and the skills to take the jobs that are available. Our economy has been the fastest growing among big provinces in terms of GDP growth after the pandemic, and we're really proud of that. But we have the highest wages of any province in Canada.
And job growth too?
Absolutely. And despite having the highest wages in Canada, we also have the highest job growth. So we led Canada in private sector job growth last month. We added 54,000 jobs last year. And just for context, in 2012, when Kevin Falcon was the finance minister, he issued a press release saying that we got 15,000 new jobs. Isn't that a wonderful thing? We added 54,000 last year. So we're dramatically growing. There's huge opportunity in British Columbia, but people need the support to be able to take advantage of those opportunities, the training, the education, to be able to get those jobs. And so that's why we're dramatically expanding our spaces in university for engineering, computer science, a new medical school, so that people have the skills to take the jobs that are there. It's time for government to step up and help deliver housing that people can actually afford. And so including for the middle class, which is something government hasn't had to do for a long time. So I believe strongly that government has an important role to play here. The opposition disagrees, but the proof is in BC's growth, leading Canada, creating tens of thousands of jobs, and taking advantage of those clean economy jobs that are coming around hydrogen, 450 new jobs in Maple Ridge assembling batteries. Really exciting things that are happening in BC right now.
對於喺華埠同埋其他即係社區嘅商業嚟講咧，就呢個財物嘅案件咧，同埋呢個塗鴉啊等等咧，就係對佢哋嘅商業造成好大嘅損害嘅。咁啊，其實就譬如打爛玻璃啊、塗鴉啊，甚至係盜竊嘅行為等等啦。咁省政府呢方面可以做啲乜嘢咧？
Yeah, great question. You know, it's hard to think of something more important for people than feeling safe in their communities. And I think Chinatown is a really good example of an area that's just taken so many hits. You know, when the cruise ships stopped during the pandemic, and then the foot traffic stopped during the pandemic downtown, and still so many people working remotely, Chinatown really felt those impacts more than a lot of areas, including downtown Vancouver. And so it's a great example of how we can work together to address these issues. So for the government of BC, specific in Chinatown, new initiatives to bring people downtown, supporting the Light Up Chinatown Festival, supporting the Chinese Canadian Museum, getting that foot traffic down there. We have new integrated teams of police, prosecutors, probation officers, working together on the most prolific offenders, tracking those individuals so that they are prevented from causing chaos. And one of the things that we've seen in Vancouver is a reduction in what we were seeing in this slow escalation in random stranger attacks. We've seen those numbers come down, so we're seeing some good success there. Also, more mental health services. Sometimes people aren't actually committing a crime, but the way they're behaving makes people feel unsafe, shouting, screaming, crying, lying on the sidewalk in trouble. So more supports for what are called CAR programs, where the police works with a psychiatric nurse, going out to respond to those calls to support people in mental health crisis, get them into the hospital where they can get the care they need. This is a very challenging problem, but we're going at it from a bunch of different angles.
OK。大概半年之前咧，就你嘅省務廳長 Andrew Mercy 就上過嚟我呢個節目啦。咁當時講緊咧，全集咧都係講緊呢個移民嘅海外資歷認證呢個問題嘅。咁呢個問題講好多年啦。咁係咪真係能夠解決得到咧？咁佢就話喺秋天咧，就省政府就會立法，咁就係做一個大嘅改革嘅。咁啱啦，你而家上嚟啦，呢個秋季議會完成咗啦。究竟即係呢個法有冇立得成，同埋你哋打算係可以點樣處理呢個問題咧？
Yeah, it's I've talked to so many people who are so frustrated. You know, they have experience in the jobs that we need them to do. The reason why they were fast-tracked for immigration to Canada and British Columbia is because they had these skills, and then they get here and they're told that they're not allowed to work here because they don't have Canadian work experience, or they have to do an English test every year while they're waiting and going through this process. And so it's very unfair. It's slowing our economy. Employers that want to hire people with skills aren't able to. People who want to work in their profession that they're skilled and experienced in aren't able to. And so this new law that did pass this last legislative session says only one English test. You don't have to do an English test every single year. It prohibits requiring Canadian experience. That's illegal now for a professional college to require that. These new rule changes, among the others, including having a clear, transparent, and understandable process to get certified, will all be in place by this coming summer of 2024, and it will help us with our shortage of teachers. It will help us with our shortage of engineers, of architects, of other professions, and also we started this work because it was so urgent in the health sector. We have more than 500 internationally trained nurses that were fast-tracked that are now in our hospital system that would have still been waiting in a 2-year approval process. And I met those nurses, a couple of those nurses doing some training so that they could get up to speed for Canada quickly. and they were so excited to get to work. We need to do more of that to grow our economy and support people that are working in jobs that are minimum wage jobs when they should be earning a decent income and helping build our province.
嗱頭先講緊話護士嗰度咧，其實真係嘅影響好大嘅，唔單止係醫療服務。以我所知咧，即係曾經有一間即係華人出名嘅安老院咧，因為唔夠護士咧，爭啲係要關門嘅。咁啊，所以即係呢方面做咗，我覺得係好重要啦。咁但係另一方面，我哋亦都睇得到咧，即係雖然你話即係 BC 省政府係新興建一啲新嘅醫院擴建喺溫哥華、列治文Surrey Burnaby 都有做呢方面嘅嘢，但係我哋同時都睇得到咧，就好多醫療嘅問題，例如要將一啲癌症嘅病人送去美國醫治啦，咁又或者係呢個手術輪候嘅時間啦，又或者經常聽到嘅就係話唔夠家庭醫生，咁其實即係喺呢方面你可以做到啲乜嘢咧？
Yeah, it's a really challenging issue, and it's one that really comes home for British Columbians. You know, they need to have care when they need it, where they need it, and that's really obvious to me and to them when they're in crisis. I was part of a meeting of premiers across Canada. We're all grappling with this issue. We've been recruiting healthcare workers away from each other. We entered an agreement to stop doing that.
Okay.
We're going to work together on training initiatives. But for British Columbia, it's a little bit like the housing strategy. It's like, what can we do right now to get people the care they need? And what's our long-term plan? So right away, we say no one should wait for cancer care. So we hired a cancer treatment center in Bellingham, Washington, so people can get cancer care right away. We asked pharmacists, what are you trained for? What can you do? Supporting people with minor infections, with rashes, with other challenges, getting them out of the clinics, getting them out of the emergency room, allowing them to renew prescriptions for people to take the pressure off. We entered a new agreement with family doctors to encourage them to take long-term relationships with patients instead of run drop-in clinics. We've opened urgent primary care centers across the province to make sure people have access to care, and we're continuing to expand that. But that's the short term. For the long term, we're building new hospitals, so we have the space we need so we can attract the health professionals we need. 5 are under construction right now across the province, including in Richmond, Surrey, Terrace, downtown Vancouver, the new St. Paul's, Fort St. James, big and small, the new medical school in Surrey, so we can train community health workers, family doctors, and nurses that want to work in community and do this important work. And ensuring that internationally trained health workers get recognized and can get to work right away. There's a lot of important work happening, and it's huge and necessary, and we are working in partnership with the federal government and provinces across Canada that are all in very similar situations because our population is getting older, and the medical professionals to treat them, the nurses and the doctors, are retiring, so we need that next generation of healthcare workers to come on board because the demand is only going to get higher.
嗱，我哋喺新聞度咧就睇得到咧，就 BC 省有個專門咧係針對一啲不法財富得翻嚟嘅一啲收入購買嘅物業嘅。咁我哋睇到新聞咧就係話你哋用呢個法律咧就係透過呢個法律嚟充公一啲喺 BC 省嘅物業。咁因為佢哋嘅錢咧就係唔正當得翻嚟嘅。咁我哋知道啦，就係有好多喺外國從事即係貪官污吏又或者係一啲大騙局嘅一啲人士咧，就逃離咗加拿大，亦都有啲嚟到 BC 省嘅。咁呢啲喺外國犯事嘅人咧，會唔會將來都成為你哋針對嘅目標咧？
Yeah, Gabriel, this is an area I'm actually very proud of. It comes out of our money laundering inquiry, and it was recommended to us that we look at unexplained wealth orders. So we passed this law that said if you can't prove where the money came from to buy this house, these cars, whatever, and you're associated with crime, then we're going to take those from you. The first one was just filed a couple of weeks ago, and I understand there are more to come. This first one focuses on allegations that the person was involved in a stock fraud and used the money from that fraud to buy a home, and then tried to go to court to get the money released that had been seized from a lawyer's trust account. This is something that we saw as people involved in, without commenting on that case, people involved in illegal activity, then using our court system to enforce illegal gambling debts that were paid for with laundered money, to enforce debts generated through organized crime. So we're changing that reputation of our province, and we're going after illegal proceeds of crime. This is why the gangs are fighting in the streets, is to make money so that they can buy things. Well, we're going to take those things away from them, and that includes corrupt officials. You know, the Iranian community that's moved here to British Columbia is very concerned. They're corrupt Iranian officials bringing money into British Columbia, in just one example. And this is a possible area where we could use unexplained wealth orders to go after those illegal proceeds of crime, even if the crime was committed overseas, to make sure that British Columbia is not a safe place for corruption or for corrupt officials.
外國滲透咧係過去一年咧全國嘅大新聞嚟嘅。咁即係較早前我都知道啦，就佢亦都漏咗出嚟，就係話溫哥華舊年嘅市選咧就係受到呢個中國嘅滲透嘅。咁因為咁樣咧，你亦都同 CSIS 咧就話要攞呢方面嘅報告嘅。咁究竟你攞到你所想睇到嘅資料咧？咁同埋作為 BC 省政府，你有冇擔心外國政府滲透喺你哋嘅工作度咧？同埋會唔會已經係喺即係下次嘅選舉咧，係可能會有滲透嘅情況出現咧？有啲咩係你會做係面對呢個問題咧
？Yeah, I have a significant anxiety about international interference in democracy here in British Columbia, and there's some really good examples why I'm anxious about it. So first of all, the Indian government is alleged to be involved in assassinating Sikh activists in Surrey as well as in the United States. The Iranian government is alleged to be involved in intimidating people protesting their regime. Hong Kong activists here in British Columbia are concerned they're being monitored by the Chinese government, especially we have the very high-profile trial of a publisher, Jimmy Lai, in Hong Kong right now. And also Ukrainians and Russians who may be living in British Columbia fearing that the Russian government is monitoring them. What we're seeing is an eroding of the understanding that we've had internationally that governments need to stay within the borders of their country and not intimidate people in other countries, or even in the case of India, allegedly kill somebody. This is very concerning for me. I asked for a briefing from CSIS, and it's not their fault, but they came and they basically gave me a series of newspaper articles, things that I could easily read, right?
Okay.
So they said, we'd like to tell you more, but the law that we have federally means we can only share that information with the federal government. So they're going to have to change that law. So the federal government is currently doing a consultation about changing that law. I hope they change it quickly. But in the meantime, CSIS is also working with Elections BC to make sure Elections BC is ready for all potential threats. When we see AI, for example, the ability to mimic people's voice, do fake video, that kind of thing. I am concerned about upcoming elections and governments that may be interested in interfering here in British Columbia for their own purposes.
Yeah, it's interesting. Well, if CSIS would give you those news articles, that means those news articles are real.
Yeah, fair enough. That's one way to look at it, Gabriel. Absolutely.
My directors already told me that, wave to me that our time is up.
Okay.
It's my great pleasure to interview you today.
Thank you, Gabriel. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for all the great work you have been doing for the province.
Great. Thank you for the interview. Yes.
係咁啊，好高興咧，就係訪問省長呢個 EB 啦。咁其實咧就即係佢亦都講咗好多咧，即係佢上任之後咧所做嘅嘢，其實真係即係好多嘅。咁所以如果大家有興趣即係重溫呢一集咧，係可以上我哋 YouTube 頻道咧，亦都係可以睇翻呢一集嘅。咁啊，今日時間到呢度啦，下個禮拜另一個話題再見，拜拜。